This one is actually also a very important lesson in terms of making the connections visible. And in one organization I worked at, they had these four components into an architectural design or drawing made visible throughout the entire system. So you would see it in the boardrooms, you'd see it in the hallways and classrooms. And it was essentially to connect the stakeholders, the community, the staff with your management system. And it would include essentially these four components. So in there, you'd make visible what is your vision, mission, governance, like what is your strategy essentially you have in place. And in some organizations, they'd have what they call strategy A3s, but they're essentially documents that talk about who's going to do what, when they're going to do it, and sort of leads to that accountability piece. So then you want to connect that to improving the business. So that's essentially where you show your process. So, and you're connecting it to the strategy. So in your process, you're connecting it to the people who are doing the work, and you're developing all those plans that are a little more specific. And then they understand and they have that clarity in terms of where they're going in terms of that process improvement. So you'd have, for example, your breakthrough type work, you'd have your more Kaizen type stuff. Then you'd connect that to your running the business, and running the business is really your accountability piece. How you're going to check and monitor it to make sure that essentially you're on target based on the KPIs you had set perhaps in your strategies, and so on. So really your staff then could see essentially how we're running the business, how we're part of it, and how we help move that strategy forward. And then the final component there is really how you're managing the business. So this is the foundational stuff that both Debbie and Andre talked about. So when you manage the business, it's what kind of way you want people to think in the organization. What is that culture you're talking about? What kind of standards, for example, that you're supporting in the system? Because you really want to have that understanding, that clarity to the staff, that in terms of this is the foundation we support to actually drive that strategy forward. And if you could move to the next slide, Debbie. In this slide here, what you see is an example from an organization, and this is essentially what they have. And I actually had an opportunity to visit this organization, and they had what they call the war room. And this was displayed in the war room. And I've been in another organization where they've had this exact similar type map visible, and like I said, in the hallways and other places within the organization. And if you could move to the next slide, Debbie. And here you see those components that I talked about. So on the left-hand side, it's very clear in terms of what the business direction is, ensuring that it meets the needs of the patients, the board, the employees. So essentially those stakeholders. It builds that strategy piece so that we have clarity in terms of that. Then it moves and connects to improving the business. And I've talked about that essentially. You're making that connection to the units essentially in terms of what their roles and responsibilities are. And then and number three, how you run the business. So in some organizations, if you're familiar with lean, they have huddles, but that's really, you have that process. So there's that constant communication between the staff who are doing the work and the strategy on the far left-hand side. So there's that real connection, and they feel also that they're participating in that change of strategy. And on the very bottom there, that's a foundational piece that I talked about. So it's just them having understanding. And even for myself, when I would see this, when I'd walk by in the organization, it would remind me essentially where I fit in here, what is my role, and how I could support the strategy of the organization.